So it sort of dawned on me that most of gardening is basically just not killing your plants. I mean, you can do all the things, you can fertilize and worry about pests and amend your soil, but you do all these things basically so that your plants don't die. And with that realization came the birth of an idea that we are going to call how not to kill your plants. So essentially, when I'm giving any advice of things that I've learned, usually by trial and error in the garden, it's simply because I've killed something and then I did something different and it didn't die. So I think from here on out, all of our gardening videos will be titled How Not to Kill Your Plants. So join us today as we go ahead and talk about one of the biggest things that I find really can take care of your plants and take them out here in summers in the South. Here in the South, I've noticed a shift in our weather over the past 10 years. And where I used to go ahead and have plants in the ground as soon as Good Friday, right before Easter, I've almost had to wait even an extra month in the past couple years, oftentimes not getting my plants into the ground until closer to Mother's Day. That seems extraordinarily late for me. However, I've also noticed that our warm weather and our good growing season has started to extend longer into September, October, and even November. The times that I am planting my winter garden with greens and Brussels sprouts and things like that, it is getting pushed later and later. And so it's giving me a longer time in the summer to actually get plants in. Now, with our season being so long down here in Georgia, and really anywhere, if you're in the Southeast, this pretty much applies to you. Maybe upper Kentucky, West Virginia, probably not quite as much. But down here where we are just straight up in the South, we can't start all of our plants in the spring. If I want pumpkins in the fall, then I have to wait and start pumpkins in June. Otherwise, I have beautiful orange pumpkins in June and no pumpkins for the fall. The problem that we're seeing though, especially if you have a garden that is in full sun, which my complete garden is, we have no shade back here, is that you put out these new baby plants in the blazing hot heat that is a Georgia summer, and very quickly your plants are shriveled up and dead. And so I think it really limits people's thinking as to what can I plant in the heat of the summer, or how can I do succession planting when one crop dies out that I've planted earlier or even on time, and how can I get a bumper crop if I can't even plant any of these plants without losing them due to the sun and the heat. And that, my friends, is where makeshift shade structures come in handy. Okay, so what you see here are pumpkins that we planted. These were probably put in about 2 to 3 weeks ago. You can see the sun is blazing down. And so Logan and I just basically took a little bit of shade cloth. We had some old screens and we just sort of fashioned this shade structure to allow these plants to get established. Now, it's really important to note that these plants actually really like the sun. They don't have any issues being in full sun. They get a little wilty, but ultimately they enjoy being in the sun. This was another section we did. This is a different kind of pumpkin, and these got put in probably a week or so after those first ones that I just showed you. But again, we use these shade structures I had an old bed sheet with a hole in it. It doesn't have to be something that's see-through. You can use screens, of course, if you have it, but if you don't, anything that will just keep the blazing heat of the sun off of your new transplants directly is going to be beneficial. Essentially, by offering shade for your new transplants, what you are allowing them to do is to get established, to get used to their new environment, to get used to the heat, because most of these plants for us were kept under a shaded structure as we started them from seed. We did harden them off, putting them out in full sun, but most plants don't love to be transplanted in the heat of the summer. Squash plants, pumpkin plants, anything in that family in particular don't like to be transplanted, period. They really prefer more of a direct sow. But because we were expanding the garden this year, we didn't have that option because we had to get these plants started before we had the beds actually ready. I am going to take you over and show you what happens when you don't get shade on your plants, and when you don't get them on your transplants, and the devastation that it can cause. So these two rows here are the same kind of pumpkin. They were planted at the same time as that second section. These are fairy tale pumpkins, and they get really lovely and kind of a creamy orange with a white coating on top. They just look really pretty and very vintage looking. They're also delicious to eat, but you can see here we did not get shade on these the day that we planted them, and in less than 24 hours I lost, almost everything that we planted in this section. It just withered and died, and you can see here there should be plants all right there, and there's definitely not. So that's the short of it. When you are transplanting anything from really June on, I would say at least June through August, and you are just dealing with those blistering hot days, you have no shade in the area that you are transplanting things in. It doesn't matter if it's pumpkins, tomatoes, even your hardier crops. Everything does better with a little bit of shade. Now, how long do you need shade for? I would say on average, probably not more than 2 weeks, maybe 3 if your plants are a little bit more tender. We found with the pumpkins that 3 weeks is about enough time for them to get well established, to develop a good root system into the ground, and to be really independent of needing that daily, twice a day watering and that extra tender, loving care that you do with new transplants. So once they start to get a little bit established like that, then we start taking off the shaded stuff and we let them go at that point. To me, I think it gives them a better chance. I think it's a little bit more fair to them, as instead of just throwing the babies out and going, here you go, let's see what happens. We're nurturing them along. We're making sure that they have the ability to stand up to the heat, to the sun, to the humidity that we experience down here in the South. Tomato plants generally I find take a little bit less, maybe even just a week, sometimes a week and a half, depending on if you have any cloudy days, if you have any rainy days. Tomato plants take much less, but I have found hands down they do so much better, especially when we're doing a summer transplant. Right now I have some of my tomato plants that I've started in the spring. They have given me tons of wonderful Roma tomatoes, and they've petered out, whether it's due to bugs or disease or just the fact that that plant has given me everything it could give me. And so I do have some reserved tomatoes or reserved tomato plants that I've been saving, and as those original plants die, I'm pulling them out, I am tossing them, and I am putting new plants in. But for those new baby plants, I am making sure to put a window screen over it or give it shade in some way, shape, or form just until it gets established. Otherwise, you're gonna come out the next day and your tomato plant is just gonna be this crispy little weed that you can't even recognize. It's very simple. Your shade structure does not have to be anything that you can see through. I do recommend a lighter colored fabric if you're using fabric. Like I said, I had an old bed sheet that had a hole torn in it. We used that. The big bedspread out there on that last pumpkin box, I don't know, it was a bedspread, I think from 1974. My husband had it, he used it for a paint cloth. It's huge, it makes a great cover because the water still gets through it. I don't have to take it off when I water. The shade cloths from, we got ours from Lowe's. They're a little on the pricey side. Amazon has some better deals. But I just needed something that would allow us to create one more section of shade. So I got that instead. Anything ultimately is going to give your plants a leg up. So I hope this video was helpful. Let me know if you're planting anything right now while it's blistering hot outside, and tell me how it's doing. Hopefully this gives you some help. Please make sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe as we continue to share our small homesteading journey with you.